If you go to this address that you see right here, within a few days you'll be able to look at the presentation and hear the words if you're halfway interested. So away we go. That's what this is all about. The information will be on the internet as we proceed through the study, and that's the address. It's just that simple. Study title shown here. The consultant team, and we're out of Portland, Oregon. We're joined in this study by a couple of talented local firms, SRF on transportation. Nelson Nygaard is not local, but they are looking at the transit hub alternatives, and then Jeff Hubel. The agenda for tonight, summarized here, 2 parts, a presentation, then a few minutes of questions, and then table discussions, and then we're going to ask for table reports. Same format we used last time. We'll ask for a volunteer at your table to give us, summarize what was discussed. And this is what our firm does. It's the only thing we do. We're the only firm in the country who has this singular focus. And we've worked in a number of places, and these are some of them, representative downtown plans. And so we have a sense of what works and what doesn't work. These are all about implementation, and your plan is about implementation. And we will use this experience in any way we can to develop an implementation strategy with you that is going to work. Study area within the yellow area. That's where the primary focus will be. On the other hand, we'll look north to the state capitol and over to the river, down to Kirkwood Mall, certainly, and attempt to then integrate that study area into the overall context in your region. There is a process and a schedule, and the process then is summarized on the left. 3 parts to it: starting piece and a designing piece and implementing piece. 4 public meetings where you see the green dots. We had that first meeting back in March, and here we are then in that meeting number 2. And the idea is to go from the very general to find out what you wanted this study to address, then to the very specific. And so we took the information you gave us last time, and we've developed some alternatives in this step 2 for your consideration. You'll evaluate those tonight, and we were talking to other stakeholders and interest groups over the next few days, and we will refine those alternatives and come back with refined alternatives and a fairly detailed implementation strategy in step 3, and then review that with you, and then finally come back before the end of the year at meeting number 4 with a really detailed plan. When we met with you last time, meeting 1, you said these were the things you were interested in addressing. We asked you to identify your top 3 issues and concerns, and these things are not in any particular order, but these were the things that you mentioned again and again. And so in the end, we need to pay attention to these, and if we evaluate where you are today, not surprising, good is green and red is poor. If we look at public gathering spaces in the downtown, for instance, today is generally poor. And the idea is then in the plan to turn those reds and yellows into greens. And so that is a challenge for us all. And this is a very simple consumer's report. There are no numbers or no ratings. It's just simple, good, fair, poor. And I think most of us will be able to agree on how we end up. Game changers are important in these kinds of studies. When we look at revitalization fundamentals and what's worked in any city, we find there are really 3 main components: the complete plan, A; B, substantial public support; and C, the implementation rules, things like design guidelines and development regulations. But coming back to then this complete plan, the thing that makes the big difference is the game changer. The game changer has these characteristics. It creates immediate momentum in the plan for implementation. The game changers change public perceptions about the downtown. Before The public may not have been very interested in being downtown or coming downtown, and all of a sudden they realize there's something happening there that they need to be a part of. But most important, they stimulate private investment. That's a game changer, and it's all about momentum. A couple of examples then. Here's one in a place called Medford, town called Medford, Oregon, where we did a plan in the downtown, and this was a piece of the downtown where the businesses moved out, and it was parking lots and used car lots, and the question is, what would they do? And we said, well, if you build this, where you see the green, a set of park blocks, investors will want to get next to it. This was the scheme that we developed, and said that'll cost about $10 million to do that, but we're sure private investors will be attracted to it. And so here it was before. It gives you a sense of what was in the area, the buildings that were there, and here it is then under construction, the park blocks. That's a new corporate office and building off to the right, and here it was about 3 weeks ago when they had an opening in downtown. That's a game changer, and that game changer cost $10 million in public money. Private investment that is following will be $145 million, a great deal for that community. And in fact, the community didn't have to put any money up front. That private investor paid for those park blocks because they felt they were so important, and those will be paid back out of tax revenues. Another game changer in Racine, Wisconsin. Before is on the left. The design then is on the right, another set of park blocks. Racine is in the Rust Belt. All the retail had moved down to the downtown. There was no market for anything, and the issue is what should they do? And we said, well, this can be part of your revitalization strategy. So here's that game changer built. And the corporate investment didn't actually follow. The game changer wasn't built until the corporation stepped forward and said, if you build that, we will come because we want to be part of that. And so there was a museum that was also built as part of that, and mixed-use projects. Here's housing over retail. That $3 million investment leveraged about $200 million in private investment that hadn't been there. 5 years they'd implemented just about everything. We did a second plan. And that is still being implemented today, but they're probably close to $700 million. Another one, which is different, is a public space in the downtown, a public square. This was our town. In the 70s, we were parking lots, and it was a place where no one wanted to be. Most of the retail, again, had moved out. It was a hostile pedestrian environment. The idea was to build a game changer in the right place that would attract private investment, that would create a downtown living room, that would change the image of the community, would create a center, and would attract that investment. That's where you see that green square. The P was a future parking structure, and the A was an anchor store. So before is shown on the left, and it was a parking ramp. And the reason that we took down the parking ramp was that's where the space needed to be. It was in the center at the crossroads, and it could be no other place if it was to work. And here it is then after today. That investment, that game changer, not only for the square, but then for the parking structure to replace the parking ramp, leveraged of $17 million public investment, leveraged about $1 billion in investment in just that influence area. And if we look at the larger downtown, it has had a profound influence since that time. So those are game changers. Don is going to give you, now we need to talk about Bismarck, and Don is going to talk to you about some of the concepts and design alternatives that we prepared in response to what you told us last time. Don.
Okay, so here we go. So there's a lot to cover, and so let's not waste any time. So we've got those two criteria, and we'll start with a basic overview of complete streets. And so when we talk about complete streets, as a reminder that we talked last time, it's about serving all modes of transportation equally in a balanced manner. That's saying you don't emphasize only cars or transit, you address the fundamental needs of all modes. So what we want to do is then start thinking about that complete street network. So we want to recognize that you need to get into the downtown. So where you see those solid purplish lines, where we think that you need to emphasize the automobility to get you to the downtown. Where you see the blue lines, we're suggesting a series of new streets to complete the grid of streets and also complement any new development. Most importantly, what we're suggesting within that box, where you see the dashed lines, are what we're describing as traffic calm streets. And these are streets that we would anticipate having a higher bias towards the pedestrian. So that's Main from at a minimum from 1st over to 7th, and then from Bowen all the way up to Rosser on 5th. We're also suggesting reinstituting your historic two-way traffic movement at the Chancellor's Square. So today it's one-way, and we say let's go to two-way. And SRF has done some preliminary assessment of that, and they say that that can be accommodated, and in fact that makes your operations and your overall downtown work better. So if you want to get east to west on Broadway, you can't do that today. With this instituted, you have that other ventilation route through your downtown. We're also suggesting this, what we're calling a pedestrian network. And there are really a couple of things. Connecting to your outlying neighborhoods with what we're describing as district connectors. You see the thinner lines. And then we're talking about within the downtown where you see the fatter green lines, a series of important green corridors. And so when we talk about green corridors, we're talking about additional landscaping, more lighting, and other things that come along with that. As part of that active transportation network, we're also thinking about how to connect to your neighborhoods and attractors that are outside that 5-minute walking area and a 5-minute bike at a minimum, and connecting to things like the Missouri River, the state capitol, and even down to your airport. So there's two ways we're suggesting on doing that. One is what we describe as a protected bikeway, and then the other would be a multi-purpose trail adjacent to your rail. So here's an example of a multi-purpose trail that we designed next to, by the way, a major Union Pacific route, and this would mix peds and bikes. Another way for moving bikes is what we'd call a protected bikeway system. So this is the standard for progressive bike communities today. And a protected bikeway system has a physical separation between the bike facility and traffic, moving traffic. So that could be landscaping, extruded curb, or parked cars. You want to have this sort of situation where you feel comfortable riding a beater bike or a beach bike or anything like this, and in fact you don't even need a helmet, frankly, in these sort of situations. So throughout your downtown network you'll have a series of systems. The protected bikeway, some people call this a cycle track, the paint on the street bike lane, and then where you've got low volume quiet streets, less than 3,000 trips a day, you could have what we're often called bike boulevards, where you have these Sharrow markings on it. So it's important to think about the bikers again. As another reminder, there's really 3 types of people in the community. This is national research, and there's 7% of those we call the strong and fearless. The people in Lycra, the people who are young, who can ride about anywhere. They'll ride in your downtown today, typically. What we want to do is to attract this capable, cautious people. 60% of the population would ride a bicycle if only they had a safe facility. So if you can combine those two target groups, you can get what we call a 40% solution. Keep the strong and fearless, plus mom and kids on their bicycles riding into downtown on a daily basis. So that's a target that we're looking at with this system. So now let's talk about some urban design pieces of this. So let's go to something that we're calling a district concept. So what we understand is your downtown has multiple mixes of uses, but what we've assembled are some like districts or groupings of types of uses that are assembled that may have some similar characteristics. So we start with things like a transition district, an employment district, a market district, an entertainment district, and a housing district. So I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. So let's start with the housing district. That's located largely in the southwest corner where we're trying to create a neighborhood. We all want to have housing over shops, but we know the cities that are successful in getting a substantial amount of housing congregated in an area focused around a public park. We also would like to think about maybe in some of the transition areas having additional housing. So in that corner quadrant, we think that with a moderate density, we can get 1,000 additional residents. That's significant as far as meeting probably latent demand and providing an opportunity for more customers for shops and places for people to work. The green concept looks something like this. Overall, there's really broken into 3 key green pieces. There are public gathering spaces, there are district parks, and I'll get into a little bit of more detail on some of the other elements. We've got a parking framework that we're talking about. And so the parking isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There are employee parking ramps, you've got your existing ramps, and then where you see the red, we're suggesting 2 retail emphasis ramps. So with the retail, we're concentrated it into 2 districts, the market district and the entertainment district. That district then can be broken down into sub-areas that you see with these circles, which is about an 1/8 mile radius, or if you go from end to end, that's a 5-minute walking distance. And within these areas, we'd like to see ground floor retail. With that, we think that you have existing about 100,000 square feet of retail. If we were to build this all out on these areas indicated in red, we think that we have about 400,000 square feet of retail. That's a size that is competitive with any regional shopping center. So when you talk about retailers, you go to the national conferences, they'll often ask, what's the total retail that center that I will go into? And this opens you up for the availability to attract a lot of retailers who are only looking for these large centers. So it's important to think about how large things get. So let's talk about the market district retail in particular. Again, stretching from 1st all the way to 7th. And when we think about this, we hearken back to the fundamental requirements of a retail street. And retail, from all the land use types, is more science than art. If you don't get all these right, you're not going to have a successful retail center. So we start with the retail configuration, and that needs to be traditional. And so when you look at all the successful retails of downtowns throughout time, and in fact, shopping malls have copied this model, where you get an anchor at one end, you get continuous edge to edge, uninterrupted by not compatible uses. You have on-street parking, and then you are on a busy street. It can't be a backwater. So that's the model that we're trying to replicate with this formula. Most important that we want to talk about is an anchor retail use, because that anchor retail use just can't go anywhere. There's fundamentals for it. And most importantly, it needs to be visible. It can't be buried out back and behind. It needs to be on that busy street again. And then it needs to be tied and locked in with a big parking reserve that is shopper friendly or grandma friendly, as we've described before. And so this isn't just by getting one big use to suck all the retail out of your downtown. What this actually does is it's good for all the little guys surrounding it. So when we look at nationally, what it means to get a retail anchor either in a shopping center or a downtown, that means for the mom and pops next to it, that's 30% additional sales. Because what this is they draw people in from a 10-mile radius, and then they chain trips once they're in your downtown. You've got a captured audience. So when we think about that retail anchor, we want to think creatively. It could be a grocery store, for example. It might be a public market. You'll see it in Milwaukee, you see them in Vancouver. If you've been to Pike's Place Market in Seattle, for example. This might be a model that builds off of your agricultural heritage. So we want to think creatively about what that anchor could be. So it might be some of these sorts of things and images that we think might work there. When we think about retail, we also need to think about the retail ramp. So you've been, over the last few years, building a number of employee parking ramps, but you have not yet built a retail-friendly or grandma-friendly ramp. And so we look at other cities who have been successful with the retail strategy. So here's Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara has a retail street that's indicated by the red line, and locked right into this, not 3 or 4 blocks away. That was kind of a 1960s model where everybody said, let's park the parking around the perimeter, and then everybody will walk into that, and it'll activate the downtown. We found that model to be a failure. And so where the places that are successful, it's no more than a half block away, preferably right on that retail street. And so that's what we're suggesting as part of this strategy. And the configuration and the design of that ramp is also very important. You need to have the right dimensions first and foremost. So it needs to be fairly wide. So here's an example of one from Portland. This is 240 feet wide, and the circulation, you never have cars crossing. So you have a continuous right up and a continuous right down. As George says, this is a ramp that you could drive with your eyes closed. So this is a replication, essentially it is a stacked Walmart parking lot. So you need to think in those terms that if I'm driving a big rig, I've just came out from a farm somewhere, I'm not intimidated to park in your ramps. And I guess most people would be intimidated in your ramps today. So another component of this is thinking about safety. It needs to be light and airy. You need to think about the vertical circulation, the stairs and the elevators. They need to be on the exterior. You never want to be isolated on this parking ramp. So when we think about that anchor in the ramp, there's really a couple of only key sites that they only fit. And that's at the intersection of Front and 5th. And here's the scheme that we're looking at, possibly that public market in that grandma-friendly ramp. So we did a series of alternatives to see what we could do with that site, because we recognize we've got some structures there. Frankly, we hate to take buildings down out of the downtown, and that's an objective that you told us that we didn't want to do. But we said this is such a critical site, and it's so critical for your downtown that we need to at least investigate it and offer it to you as an alternative. So for example, if you were to build a ramp on that site today, it's 180 feet wide. If you were to build a grandma-friendly ramp, one option would be actually to build over the top of Front Avenue, as illustrated here. The added advantage of doing this is that you get a direct connection to the Civic Center. You're building this new exhibit hall, and that would give you the ability to come down an elevator and go right into the Civic Center from this parking ramp without even having to cross a road, frankly. So this is what that might look like. The roadway going through that parking ramp, some connections to the pedestrian vertical circulation and ground floor retail lining that, so that this isn't a bunker, like it is built as a building that is compatible with your architecture. Another alternative might actually look at vacating 5th. So we know there's some traffic concerns, but we offer this because it might make your Civic Center work better, because this gives you another additional area for exhibit halls. What we have found again and again in cities is that they never plan for success. So that you need to have a strategy. If your Civic Center builds out, you have yet another phase to build out in the future. And so this is one option that would do that if you need, but you would need to close Front Avenue. And here's an example of what that would look like. Very similar to the option that I showed you before with the ground floor retail, and generally about the same dimensions. So what we did is again a consumer's reports analysis of this. And we looked at the key criteria. Is it grandma friendly? 180 feet isn't so much. Is it integrated into the Civic Center? You see the analysis here. And then finally, what are the impacts to the through traffic? And generally, as you get the wider ramp, you have a more viable ramp in our determination. It's something that for your consideration. So let's talk a little bit about how to design a retail-friendly main avenue. So we're suggesting what we're describing is right-sizing that street, some people call it, and we're calling it a road diet, essentially taking a lane out of that roadway. You've got the capacity for it to work today. It's 10,000 trips a day. I'll talk about that. Ideal street from a pedestrian standpoint and from a retail standpoint is about 8,000 to 12,000 trips a day. If it's less than that, it gets a little bit too quiet. If it gets too much more traffic than that, it becomes hostile in an environment you're not comfortable as sitting in an outdoor cafe. So this is an image of what we think that would look like. Places for outdoor dining. There might be a place for outdoor and sidewalk sales and other things like that. So as mentioned, your trips today are about 10,900. SRF is looking at all the traffic information for this and has done some assessment of this proposal. So here you are today, narrow travel lanes, very wide intersections, very wide sidewalks, and no turn lanes. The proposal looks at doing something like this. The benefits would be widened sidewalks, widened travel lanes, a dedicated turn lane so you don't have any conflicts, and shorter crossing distance. So this is a little bit counterintuitive because you think 4 lanes would be better. But in fact, this is an analysis from another project that shows what happens when you have a 4 lane. And if you've ever driven down Main and you're behind somebody who wants to turn left and you want to go straight, it's a conflict point. And you get a lot of dancing back and forth and you get a lot of accidents as part of that. So what happens, the street doesn't function very well despite having 4 lanes of traffic. The advantage of going from 3 lanes is if you're moving through, you never have that conflict. And if you're turning left, you've got a protected lane so that somebody doesn't come up from behind and rear end you. So counterintuitively, frankly, this 3 lane works better from a traffic operations standpoint. So here today, narrow sidewalks, no turn lane, narrow travel lanes. The proposal, wide sidewalks going from 11.6 to 15, similar to what you have outside the Peacock Alley today. A continuous turn lane and wider travel lanes. One of the complaints and anecdotal stories we've heard, it's hard to open your door because you're afraid you're going to have your door peeled off by somebody going by you. So going from a 10-foot to a 12-foot lane, it has some advantages. So the analysis, again, in summary, the facility can expect to divert maybe to some parallel routes, and those diversions might likely be to Front or Rosser. Looking at the gathering spaces in your downtown, that would go along with this area. The key component of then, again, is this downtown living room, the place, the postcard place for your downtown. And there are some fundamental requirements, like the retail, that need to be addressed for a plaza. And one of those is at the location. It can't be out on the corner. It really needs to be at that crossroads. That it needs to be a recognizable center of your community. And so that characteristics of that plaza is different from a park. A plaza is a multi-purpose space that is dedicated for multiple events. You can have a farmer's market in the morning. You can have a concert in the evening. It has tie-ins of electricity and water, all the kinds of things that typically are brought in for your street fairs today. That would be dedicated space for this. We would anticipate that this could be programmed for use at 300 days a year, whether it's a World Cup match or a flower show, as we're showing here. It needs to be designed to accommodate a semi-truck, because inevitably you're going to have a concert that's going to need to do this. A lawn can't do that. It needs to be able to accommodate a skating rink in the wintertime. A lawn really doesn't do that well. So in the end, it needs to be memorable and magical. It needs to be a place worthy of a postcard, a place for the city's Christmas tree. So what we did is we assessed a number of sites. These were suggested by you in the previous meetings. We've had some from staff and a whole number of other people, and some we identified ourselves. So we assessed 5 sites and said, which one works? So we started first with the site at 5th and Thayer. You probably can't see this, but there's a vacant lot on the west side of the Burleigh County building. And so when we assessed the critical elements of this, it didn't do so well, mostly red, as you can see. Then we looked at another site at Broadway and 5th. So we said, what about that site? It was indicated in some of your previous planning documents. A little bit better, but not all that well either. Then we looked at another site at 6th and Main. And we said, how'd that work? Again, not all that well. And we looked at another site at 3rd and Main. Looking at the other side, too small of a site, not good edges. And that didn't do that well. So where we landed, the site that best meets all of those, if we can deal with some of the enclosure issues along the trackway and take the train out of play, is the depot itself. So that's the issue for us. How can we get a plaza at that key site? So looking at 5, we go back again and say, this historically has been the crossroads, the heart of your community, the public assembly space. We've seen a number of images of presidents visiting this space. So it is recognizable. And so here's the concept. So this indicates for that depot is to get you grounded looking from east to west. And the concept would be something like this. A civic celebration zone, largely paved. Of course, we want to have artwork, we want to have some shaded areas, we want to have the ability to drive up and drop grandma off at a restaurant, for example, but that roadway would be flush with the plaza. It would be 5 miles per hour in travel speed, and it could be in a moment converted and closed for events when that space would be needed. So looking from west to east, here's an example of the character of that. It would have a lot of child-friendly elements. This is a key component of this. So we need to think about how to bring mom in, because mom shops and that brings business. So if we can make this child-friendly and deal with some of the issues of this space, we think that there's a real benefit for that. The entertainment district is the next piece I want to talk about. So this is part of your retail framework, but this is largely along Fifth. And so the key component of making this work is dealing with the rail crossing. Today it is a knife edge that separates this area, and as a result of this, in our opinion, we see this as a major reason why you have not seen a lot of investment in this area. So to make that work, we're suggesting a pedestrian underpass. So there would be a procession zone and steps and stairs and ramps that lead up to it. So zooming in a little bit here, it would be adjacent to your existing Fifth. So this wouldn't be narrowing the roadway at all. So we'd keep that outside and adjacent to the public right-of-way inside the existing area of the depot plaza. So there would be an access ramp and stairs on the north side because of the grade concerns. On the south side, because your site slopes away, we think we can do this all with a ramp. And you see that characteristic and that anchor that we talked about adjacent to it in the parking ramp. So if I'm going to connect to this 22 trains a day, I can make this work. The key piece of this is dealing with the characteristics of that underpass. We've all been to really awful, dank, and dirty, nasty underpasses. This isn't what we're talking about. This needs to be light, airy, and attractive. This is something that needs to be a key feature as part of the design. So here's an underpass that we designed under an interstate freeway. It is designed to be graffiti resistant. It is designed for light, even during the daylight hours, because often that's a concern. So there are interior LED lights with glass blocks so that that can be changed on a moment's notice for Christmas lighting, for example. It can turn red and green. So this is a characteristic that we'd like to see. Or here's a pedestrian oriented concept of that in Phoenix. A key component of this district is linking the Kirkwood Mall and the Civic Center into your downtown. They're a little bit out of walking distance, but we need to make sure that it's a compelling reason to tie this into your downtown retail. So when we look at this area, we start thinking of the land use and breaking it into 3 key zones. What we're describing broadly is a convention zone north of Bowen up to the track, a nightlife zone between Bowen and the mall property, and a new street that we've suggested, and the mall itself as a lower zone. So starting with that convention zone, we'd like to see a full build out of the Civic Center. We'd like to see an all-weather sky bridge that connects to a convention hotel. And then over time, we'd like to see some of the existing parking lots that are along that edge and some of the uses along the edge converted to housing with ground floor retail. That convention hotel could be even as large as this. This might be a little intimidating, may not be this big, but this is the kind of thing that we would anticipate for it. That all-weather connection, that sky bridge, needs to be that ability to go in winter months to connect without going outside. This is a key feature that all successful convention centers have. We move then down to the nightlife and mall zones. So within this, we see retail with uses above them, another parking ramp, because we anticipate needing to replace some of the parking that we're losing with the development of this area and meeting unmet demand. And then we think about the mall itself, rethinking about how the mall really expands and starts engaging the downtown with a retail anchor and retail shops and an interior food court that would tie on the south end. So when we think about the nightlife zone, these are fairly typical sorts of treatments that we find around healthy convention centers. So we would see something like Beale Street, if you've ever been to Memphis. You've ever been to some of these areas where they've dedicated a street for these nightlife activities. At the mall, we would anticipate some sort of attraction that are also oriented towards the nightlife. So if you've been to places like Louisville or Los Angeles, there's a thing called Alive. If you've been to Kansas City, the Power and Light District, for example, have these sort of treatments. So when we think about this, this is what we'd envision. So this is looking from the intersection of Bowen and Fifth, looking south towards the mall. You see the blue would be that structure, and then this zone, nightlife zone in between. So again, to orient you, this is looking north towards Maine. Here's the street that is currently designed today, 4 lanes of traffic. Here's what we're suggesting, 3 lanes of traffic and an expanded pedestrian realm and additional landscaping and greenery. So here it is in section. You're currently no curbside parking and 4 lanes of traffic. We're suggesting adding parking on the left side and reducing that down to 3 lanes of traffic. On the west side, we would have an easement for what we're calling a hospitality zone or hospitality easement area, and would envision it to be something like this. It's 25-foot wide sidewalk, not 15, very wide, so that you can have this sort of condition from Calgary. You could have a promenade on the west side, so you have a formal surge area because you're going to have a lot of people coming to the Civic Center for events, so this might be something like this. We'd like to see this zone have considerable amount of public art, not only for these blocks, but for the whole entire corridor. So the art could be in many forms. It could be simply within the furniture zone, or maybe key pieces such as this at the Denver Convention Center. Something as playful as that. We'd like to see a transition and gateway as part of this, probably in all entry points into your downtown. But here is a gateway that announces the entry into an entertainment zone in San Diego. The street in the nightlife zone, we would like to see it designed to be a flexible street or a festival street. That street might have these characteristics. 98% of the time it could have through traffic. It would be designed from building face to building face with brick. There might be two columns. You see I'm circling here. These come down, and then that roadway is closed. And then it becomes a staging area for special events. Say you had a state basketball tournament and you wanted to do something special here, you could do that. Pedestrian mall, for the mall engaging, we're suggesting something like this at the mall. So enough of that area. So let's talk about another zone in your downtown, the employment district. So you see all those areas. The idea here is to really strengthen your existing major employment areas and provide a strategy for growth of them. So you've got government uses, you've got hospital uses, which it really is based upon. So there are a couple of things that we'd like to see in here. We'd like to see some additional green assembly areas, and then where you see the blue, we've identified areas for additional buildings and some additional parking facilities that I quickly identified for you along the Rosser corridor in particular. So with that, we think that we can start getting close to 1 million square feet, 100,000 square feet in these mid-rise buildings. So this would contribute to the health of that district and give those uses areas for expansion. So key for this is, like the retail, is understanding where the parking needs to go. So you've got some existing where you see the brown ramps, and your 6th Street ramp will be an employee parking ramp. And so we're suggesting maybe 3 alternative locations for additional ramps between St. Alexius and Sanford, which was suggested in some previous studies, and then a couple other sites along Thayer, at 3rd and also at 5th. So here's the ramp that will be built at 6th. And then let's talk about some green spaces. So we've talked about a plaza in this district, and we're suggesting is a green. So this it would be complementary to the plaza, not a replacement. They would work in concert with each other. They would complement each other. So this green really is an idea starting to develop a campus typology or a characteristic for this area. We've got some wonderful green space around the county courthouse. The idea is to then take that green and move it south all the way down to Broadway so that you establish a green placemat for these civic buildings. So you've got a 6th Street ramp, your city building, and a proposed new building where you have a parking lot today. The most important piece of this is what we're calling the Mayhew screen. And that Mayhew screen would be located to feature your auditorium. It's a signature building that needs to have more prominence in your downtown. So this would extend from 5th, go and encompass for a flexible space on 6th Avenue, and then terminate at Mayhew's auditorium, the Bell Mayhew's, and your memorial hall next to it. So here's a concept for it. As you can see, it'd have more green than paved area. There would be areas for dining, for example, though, on this new building that you see in the foreground. And that character might be like this. It may be for strolling and promenading, public art. It may be lawn for people to sit outside. And then there would be some connections. So today you've got an alleyway. If I'm walking to the city county building or to the courthouse, I go through an alley. We're suggesting replacing that, underground all the utilities, and feature it like this. It might have automobile traffic. This is a concept and a plan that we did in Oak Park, Illinois, that has a roadway that clearly allows automobiles on it, but it's curbless and it has a strong bias towards the pedestrian. It may not have cars at all, and it may be an opportunity for public art. This is in Los Angeles. This is a sculpture alley. It may have just some lower cost elements, and it may be seasonal, such as coverings. Another part of this district is the connection up to the Capitol, and we're suggesting what we're describing as a Capitol cultural trail. If any of you have been to Indianapolis, they've got a very similar thing that we're modeling this after. And it would be on 6th, so you really can't read this. The trees get in the way in the aerial photograph, but you know what's going on there. It's a one-way roadway today with some tired sidewalks. What we're suggesting is to make that two-way as part of the Chancellor Square improvements, maintain the curbside parking on the east side, widen the sidewalks, provide a protected bikeway in lieu of the parking on the west, and then improve your intersections. So here it is today in section. Angled parking, one-way traffic. Proposal here, two-way traffic, parking on the east side, protected bikeway on the west, wide sidewalks, and we know there are concerns about driveways in and out of things like the new ramp. We can deal with that. There's lots of guides of how to deal with that, and we're illustrating one of those here. So here is what it looks like today, looking from the Sky Bridge at the Radisson, looking north, and this is the characteristics that we would have today. Again, now we're seeing that complete street model where there's a balance between auto access, accessibility, and all modes. And here's the model that we're built on that I mentioned. This is in Indianapolis where they've actually built this. We're also looking at transit hubs. We're currently in the process of doing that with Nelson Nygaard today. There's 5 sites that we're looking at, and they're offered here. We'll land on one and offer that to you in the future. So they're listed here. We'll get into more detail on that later. So the key component of this is to look at your study criteria. Do you want to run through this, George? And then so at the end of the process, you need to be skeptical and very critical of this because we want all of these in the end to turn to green. So has this done this? Have we proposed anything to you? It's up to you to decide that. You've come up with another option. We want to get in that discussion with you. That's the end of the presentation. Please click on the button below the presentation and enter the password. Thank you very much.